delegates and friends, please put your hands together for Tanya Plibersek.
Thank you for that very warm Queensland welcome. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, pay my respects to their elders past and present. I want to thank Dr. Jim Chalmers for that very warm welcome. I'm so pleased that he and our other newbies have taken a chance on coming to Canberra to be part of the Federal Labor caucus. Opposition's a hard time, and it's a big commitment to make. Probably a lot of people have said to Jim, it's life, Jim, but not as you knew it. I want to also acknowledge all of my federal colleagues, Jan McLucas, Bernie Ripoll, Claire Moore, Joe Ludwig, Terry Butler, Jim, Graham Perrott, Chris Ketter, every single one of them a terrific contributor down in Canberra. I want to say how wonderful it is to be here with Anastasia. Anastasia's been doing such a fine job in such difficult times. And there's two blokes that I want to make particular mention of today. I think one's not here at all, one's still coming. I want to say that my friend Bill Shorten would have loved to have been here with you today. Bill has had a pretty bad week, I've got to say, but he's had a wonderful year. Who would have thought that slightly less than a year from the last federal election, Tony Abbott would have had the shortest political honeymoon in Australian history? Yeah. Because like Anastasia, here with Campbell Newman, Bill has been in Canberra keeping Tony Abbott, well, I was going to say keeping him honest, holding him to account every single day. I want to say how wonderful it is to be in my friend Wayne Swan's home state too. I think Wayne's somewhere flogging his book this morning, but you know, 40 years ago, Wayne Swan came to Canberra, and those 40 years he served the Labor Party in many different roles, including as the treasurer that saved Australia from the global financial crisis, and did it to save hundreds of thousands of jobs of ordinary people. And he did it at a time too when we were able to introduce the Gonski School education funding reforms, the NDIS, and other great Labor reforms. I want to say how wonderful it is to see state colleagues here, those of you who are already in the state parliamentary Labor Party, and those of you who I've been campaigning with, who I'm confident I will see there after the next election. Local government candidates, wonderful to see you, and local government representatives, my union comrades, delegates, one and all. Great to see you in a standing room only Labor Party conference. In particular, I want to say how great it is to be in Brisbane. Obviously, I'm from south of the border, but when I'm here, I know we have at least one thing in common. We know in politics, in New South Wales and in Queensland, and unfortunately federally too, that opposition is the worst place to be. The difficulty of moving on from the past while staying united as a team. The frustration of seeing what you've built up torn down. The bitterness of being proved right on all the dire predictions we made on the campaign trail. And so it really is nothing short of remarkable that Queensland Labor has done so well at this difficult time under Anastasia's leadership. Thank you, Anastasia, for your hard work. It's not been an easy job. It's not been an easy job, but Anastasia, you can hold your head up the way you've kept the team together and the way you've held Campbell Newman to account. I also want to make a special mention of two of the newer members of the state team. Yvette, could you stand up, please? the first is the first is a friend and an old colleague of mine, Yvette Dath, who took Redcliffe back for the ALP. Could there be a sharper contrast than between Scott Driscoll, the disgraced former member, and Yvette? One having to jump out of politics before being pushed, the other such an effective campaigner and representative that she was allowed only 6 months off after a gruelling federal election campaign before she was called back to public life. And of course, Anthony Lynham. Can you stand up? The new member for Stafford. What a campaign. Over 4,000 volunteer phone calls, 4,000 doors knocked on, 350 volunteers on polling day, and on election day, a 19.1% swing. Carried every booth in the electorate bar one. And he's going to win that one next time, aren't you? But these by-elections weren't just about the quality of our candidates and the strength of our campaigns, great though they were. Anthony Lynham met a fellow on the north side on polling day, George, 81 years old. That's right, isn't it? He'd never voted Labor in his whole life until that day. And I guess there's one more person to thank for that. Yes, it's time to talk about Campbell Newman. When Bill Shorten gave his budget reply speech in response to Joe Hockey's first budget a few months ago, I had people stopping me after that budget reply speech, stopping me in the street and saying, thank you for giving voice to the feelings we have of unfairness about that budget. Well, voters in Redcliffe and Stafford are the start of that 12-month right of reply that Queenslanders have been waiting to deliver ever since Campbell Newman's first budget. Because who would have voted LNP if they'd known that nurses and health workers were going to be sacked at Redcliffe Hospital? Who would have voted for Campbell Newman if he'd told them that funding cuts to Metro North Health would see 1,000 workers sacked in that area alone? And who in Stafford would have voted for them knowing that community organisations would be gutted by the cuts to the Skilling Queenslanders for Work program? And who would have voted for them if Campbell Newman had come clean on his plans for Queensland? When he was elected, Campbell Newman said, I pledge to you that we will conduct ourselves with humility, grace and dignity. Yeah. But for the first time Labor voter in Stafford, for George, it was the arrogance of the LNP that finally tipped him over the edge. The fact that on top of all the broken promises, on top of all of the cuts, they just stopped listening to the people who put them there. And that's starting to sound like a very familiar story. Yes, it's time to talk about Tony Abbott. We said in the federal election campaign that Campbell Newman was the curtain raiser for an Abbott federal government. For a playbook that has proven to be such a train wreck here in Queensland, it's becoming a remarkably consistent pattern for Conservative governments. Step 1, promise everyone from opposition that there's nothing to fear. Step 2, get into government, hold a commission of audit so the big end of town can give you your marching orders. Step 3, cut to the bone. Health, education, the services that we rely on. Let's take Campbell Newman. First, he tells Queensland public servants that they have nothing to fear and that he will revitalise frontline services. In his first budget, he cut $3 billion from the Queensland health system and sacked 4,000 workers. And that was just the start. So that's revitalising, Newman style, rip the guts out of the services that Queenslanders rely on. And then Tony Abbott, right up to the day before the election, the night before the election, he was saying no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no change to pensions, no new taxes. Well, then he follows the usual playbook. In comes the Commission of Audit. Out come all the recommendations that have been hiding in the bottom drawer for cuts to health, to education and to other services. Of course, here Tony Abbott starts to improvise a little on the plan. The Commission of Audit only recommended a $5 GP co-payment for concession card holders. Well, Tony Abbott can do one better than that. He's gone to $7 for pensioners. Campbell Newman said that he's not a right-wing ideologue. And then he sacked 14,000 Queenslanders. Tony Abbott says before the election, the one thing that the Australian workers will find is that I am their best friend. And then he goes and cuts 16,500 jobs from our public service and kills the car industry to boot. You know, he promised 1 million new jobs. We just thought some of them would be in Australian. And you know, for Queenslanders, it's not bad enough just having to sit through the rerun of the attacks Campbell Newman's made on your way of life. It's the fact that separately these two are poison. Put them together, they are devastating. Take the impact on our health system. In the United States, they're trying to get out of the two-tier user pays system that has led to an expensive system that keeps people sick. They're moving away from it. That's what Campbell Newman and Tony Abbott want for Australia. And then Campbell Newman cuts to hospitals. Tony Abbott, he's right back in there, cuts to hospitals, cuts to GP services and cuts to preventive health services, the things that are supposed to keep Australians healthy and out of hospital. It's like coming down with the flu and getting a bad dose of food poisoning on top of it. Take education. Campbell Newman called the Gonski school funding reforms a bucket of custard. He said no to $3.8 billion of extra funding for Queensland school kids. And he didn't just say no to the extra money, he said no to a fairer system that means the poorest kids, the most disadvantaged kids, finally get a better deal. Now, Christopher Pyne. Yeah. Well, Christopher... it's funny, every time I say his name I get that reaction. Well, Christopher Pyne has unveiled his plans for higher education with uni students paying more and getting less. So it's true that right across the board, all students are going to be worse off. But the biggest tragedy are the kids, the smart kids, who'll never make it through those university gates because of the prospect of decades of rising debt. What happens to those kids, the bright ones who are born in the wrong postcode? The ones that the Liberal Party and LNP want to keep piling handicaps on, from threats of federal cuts to preschool funding, all the way through their school lives to more expensive TAFE and more expensive university. The cumulative effect of the robbing of those kids that Campbell Newman and Tony Abbott have done, the cumulative effect is devastating. It's like having a hopeless teacher and sitting next to the school bully. What they want to do to young people just breaks your heart, really. Cut TAFE, cut Youth Connections and those other programs that have been successful in helping kids find a job. Leave them without any income at all for 6 months at a time if they're unlucky enough not to find a job, and then give them a debt sentence if they want to go to TAFE or uni. The question of whether to fund university education is something that really, I think, shows up the difference between us and them. They argue, they say, why should any of us, why should a factory worker or a truck driver pay for the university education of someone else through their taxes? Why should we help anyone get ahead? It's every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. That's their approach. And we respond that those graduates, those future graduates, they'll pay through the tax system when they're graduates, and they'll help the next generation, and they'll help the next generation. Because to us in the Labor movement, health and education aren't just businesses, they are the right of every Australian, and reserving them for the privileged diminishes us all. I want to tell you just a super quick story about myself. When I was about 4 or 5, we went to Slovenia for the first time, which is where my parents are from. Got another Slovenian down here, yay! When we arrived, we went to my grandfather's farm, and we went straight to the farm, and they weren't in the house, everybody was out in the field. They were all there with their neighbours cutting the wheat crop. And it's 40 years ago. They were cutting the wheat crop with scythes. They were walking along the fields using scythes to cut the wheat crop, and then bundling the wheat up into bundles, stacking them up to dry in the sun. Sheafs. Well, I think they're stooks and then sheafs, but anyway. Or sheafs then stooks. And then when we finished working, we got into a wooden cart pulled by bullocks that took us home. It's true. The four-legged variety. Not quite as handsome. And, you know, I think about that first time that I met my grandfather, and I think about what he would think of my life now and the opportunities that I've had. And the thing that strikes me most about it is he could never have imagined 40 years ago the jobs that exist in Australia today. The fact that we live in a country where any kid can go to school, and we have aspired to any kid being able to do post-school education, TAFE, vocational education, or university, and not based on their family's wealth, but based on their ability and their desire and their dreams. What will this country be like in 40 years' time? We cannot imagine the jobs that will exist in 40 years' time. We can't even conceive of them today. And so we're not just robbing these individual kids of their opportunity, we are robbing the future prosperity of this nation if we don't invest in education. Each one of us has a different story about what makes us Labor. I think of my parents, my dad, who migrated to Australia in the 1950s, and he worked here in Queensland for a time, cutting cane and building the big sugar containers, the big vats, silos, whoever it was that corrected me before. Help me now when I need it, come on. And you know, it was hard work, and he worked hard at it, and he felt the effects of that work right through his life with the cement dust in his lungs. And it was so important to him that he could provide for his family, and he told me that's why you always have to be part of your union. Instead of going it alone, being part of a union meant that he could rely on the decent wages and conditions that make it possible to raise a family. And I think of my mum, who also came to Australia in the early 50s, in her 20s, no English, had to leave school early like so many people of her generation. She worked in factories until she stopped to raise us. And I think of how hard my parents worked. And all I ever had to do was say to them, it's educational, for them to hand over their hard-saved money. They never resented paying tax so that other people could go to university, as Christopher Pyne says, because those other people were their kids. We were the first generation to have that chance, and I cannot tolerate a vision of Australia where we are the last generation to have that chance. Each of us has a different story about why we're Labor, but we all share a vision. When I was elected, I said I was proud to live in a country where your birth is not your destiny. And together, as a movement, we can build on that vision. We've done it before. We're a party that values our history and the great Labor reforms of the past, like Medicare and superannuation. And importantly, we'll do it again, because our party is the party of building the future. And as bad as Campbell Newman and Tony Abbott are individually, and as toxic as they are in combination, by that same degree, Labor, working together in state and federal government, can change Queensland for the better. And that's the reason that Anastasia and her team have been working every day to hold the Newman government to account. And that's why Bill and his federal team have been working every single day to take on Tony Abbott. A British Prime Minister, the Earl of Derby, once said, "The duty of an opposition is simple, to oppose everything and propose nothing." Well, I think Tony Abbott listened to that advice. And sadly, it worked for him. But we know we are different. We know that we are only worthy of regaining government because of our hopes and our aspirations for this country and because of what we stand for. A decent wage and strong rights at work, the purpose of a thriving economy, not the barrier to it. A health system where patients are treated on need, not triaged on the size of their wallets. Schools where every kid can get a decent education and where a difficult childhood doesn't mean that you are lost for the rest of your life. We'll face up to the challenge of climate change because the political costs of today are nothing compared to the real costs we're leaving to our kids and grandkids. And we won't stop until every Australian has the same rights, no matter the colour of your skin or the gender of the person you love. We stand for an Australia where if you become homeless, you don't become invisible. If your child is born with a disability, you're not left to fend on your own. If you lose your job and you can't make ends meet, you can lean on us while you look for work, and then you in turn help others. Delegates, we know that prosperity and justice only come together when we work together. And that's the Labor way, the kind of Australia we stand for. And that's why we're taking up the fight against Campbell Newman and Tony Abbott. And Queensland, it starts with you. See you on the campaign trail.